Did you know there are people who invested $5,000 a month into the S&P 500 and became a millionaire in just 10 years? This is an impossible goal for most of us. So if you don't have an enormous amount of money to invest every month and you're not looking for get-rich-quick schemes, this video is for you. We will look at a realistic and achievable path to becoming a millionaire by retirement using the S&P 500. We all know or hear that the S&P 500 is used as the general indication of how the markets are performing. But did you know that it has the ability to make you a millionaire with little effort? This is going to be a video on the power of the S&P 500, what it is, why it's so well regarded, and how you can invest in it to set yourself to be a millionaire in the future. Before we begin, my name is Rohan and I make weekly videos on personal finance and investing. My goal is to share my learnings to save you some time and fast track your financial journey. If you want to know more about me, you can check the description. Now off to the topic. So what are some reasons why you should consider holding the S&P 500 as part of your investment strategy? The first and the more obvious reason is diversification. The S&P 500 consists of the 500 of the largest publicly traded companies in the United States. However, these 500 companies represent about 80% of the total US market. And this is why S&P 500 serves as the barometer for the overall performance of the US markets. So when you buy the S&P 500, you're essentially buying a big portion of the US market and betting that the US economy will do well in the future. When we look at the sectors contained within the S&P 500, we see that 30% can be attributed to tech companies, while healthcare and financial companies come in at second and third with 12 to 13%. Sectors such as basic materials and utilities come in last at about 2 to 2.5%. Overall, you get a really good mix of companies contained within different sectors that drive the US economy. Looking at the top 25, you'll find some very well-known names such as Google, Apple, Visa, Adobe, and Pepsi. But here's something interesting to note. The top 10 companies account for almost 30% of the total index. If you look at Apple alone, it contributes about 7.5% to the S&P 500. So what does all this mean for you as an investor? If you were to take $10,000 today and invest it within the S&P 500, you're essentially buying $750 worth of Apple, $650 worth of Microsoft, and your money is proportionally split among other companies. The composition of the S&P 500 is adjusted quarterly by a committee based on certain criteria and conditions. So you don't have to worry about being invested in companies that are not performing well or whose stock lacks basic fundamentals. But it's not all about diversification, which brings us to the next reason why you should hold the S&P 500. History of growth. Now this might seem crazy to some people due to recency bias because we just went through a bear market in 2022, and some even say there's more downside to come this year. But if we look at the last 30 years, we have had only 6 down years, with even 2023 being up so far. In fact, even looking as far back as 1926, the S&P 500 returns were positive for 75% of the years. And the annualized returns sit at over 10% if you assume that the dividends were reinvested. This is an amazing history and very hard to beat returns. If we look at some statistics, it's easy for about 50% of fund managers to beat the S&P 500 over 1 year, but over 5 years, 85% lose out, and over a decade, more than 90% lose out. For the average investor, picking the few winners in a sea of funds is extremely difficult, if not impossible. It might just come down to luck. Now, if you want to try beating the fund managers over the long term, you can certainly try and even succeed. But just know that the probability might not be in your favor. Talking about these returns brings us to the next reason for holding the S&P 500. This also shows us our realistic path to becoming a millionaire. It is the concept of compound effect. To understand this, let's take two examples. On one hand, we have Jane, and on the other, we have Tom. Jane had a grasp on her finances from the age of 21 when she started her first job. She started investing $300 a month into the S&P 500. She will continue doing so until the age of 60, which gives her about 40 years to grow her money. As she approaches retirement at 60, she would have accumulated over $1 million if we assume a return of 10%, tax rate of 15%, and an average inflation of 2%. Tom, on the other hand, delayed investing until the age of 30, and at 31 he starts investing $300 a month as well. Under the same assumptions, his account only grows to $436,000, less than half of that of Jane. Now, this may be an oversimplified comparison, but it really demonstrates the power of compounding. A delay of 10 years resulted in massive opportunity costs for Tom, and he ended up losing more than $500,000. Einstein once referred to compounding as the eighth wonder of the world, and the S&P 500 is a prime example of this. If you're a Jane, congratulations, you have time on your side. If you're a Tom like I am, you need to invest at least $750 a month into the S&P 500 to reach the same milestone. If you can find ways to invest more money and reach a point where you're investing about $1,500 a month, you can more than double that milestone. So, if you manage your money wisely, this is the realistic path to becoming a millionaire using the S&P 500. But it might look different for everyone. The key is to invest, stay invested, and consistently increase your capacity to invest. I will also link this DCA calculator by Fidelity in the description. You can try it out to see what you need to do to achieve your goals. By the way, YouTube has not been easy, but you can make it a little easier. If you have found this video useful, hit like and consider subscribing for weekly videos and regular shorts about market updates and many useful tips. Now back to the topic. So by now it should be clear why S&P 500 is a great tool for building wealth. The question now is, how do you invest into the S&P 500? It's much simpler than you might think. One of the most accessible ways is through low-cost exchange-traded funds or ETFs. For Canadians, I recommend the Vanguard option, ticker symbol VFV. This ETF closely tracks the performance of the S&P 500 and keeps your costs low. Remember, minimizing fees is extremely crucial for maximizing returns. You can even find financial advisors that charge more than 10 times this amount. For people in the US, we have Vanguard's VOO. If you are in Canada, to get started, you can simply use an investing platform like Wealthsimple or Questrade. Some platforms like Wealthsimple even have the option of fractional shares. This basically means that you don't need to wait to have a certain amount of money to get started investing. You can literally get started with $1. So please don't let any excuses stop you from starting your investing journey. Please stick to a good investing schedule and dollar cost average into the market over the long haul. In my investment portfolio, I hold dividend stocks, growth stocks, and even large cap stocks. But a huge portion of my portfolio sits in the S&P 500. Finally, I'm not a financial advisor. Remember, investing in the stock market carries some risk, especially in the short term, and past performance is no guarantee of future results. It's essential to do your own research and consult a financial advisor if necessary. However, based on the last 100 years performance, I feel confident holding the S&P 500. If we let time and compound effect work their magic, we too can achieve our financial goals. Keep learning and stay on top of your finances. Until next time.